This is part two of our intro to sound. Um, we're going to be going over what causes hearing loss and talking about the amplitude of sound waves, as well as how to protect yourself from this hearing loss. So, hopefully, if you're watching this video, you already watched part one. Part one is going to be linked in the description of this video. Um, and hopefully, you've also already completed this hearing test. And so the idea there was you were just seeing what was the highest frequency that you were able to hear. And as I mentioned before, teenagers and young adults right now are experiencing what is called premature hearing loss, where you're losing your hearing faster than previous generations were. So, if you took this test, these numbers based on these ages are based on standards that were set in the 1970s and 80s. So, right now, if you were scoring in the 30, 39 area, don't be shocked, don't be concerned. If you're scoring in the 50 and 60 range, you may want to be a little reflective in terms of some of your behavior that we're going to talk about later and maybe make some different decisions in the future. Or if you're super concerned, please talk to an audiologist. How this works, if say 15.8 kilohertz was the highest frequency that you could hear, like you couldn't hear the 16.7 one, that means your ears are about the equivalent of a 30-year-old, okay, and so forth, okay. So hopefully you have that number. Then the question becomes, what is causing this hearing loss? Most often, it is just exposure to loud sounds. So it's the repeated exposure, like hearing loud sounds over and over again, or hearing a loud sound for a really, really long time. So remember, loud is the amplitude of the sound wave, or volume is the amplitude of the sound wave. And this hearing loss happens naturally as we get older, because as you get older, you have had more opportunity to be exposed to loud sounds. Right? We measure the volume or loudness of sound using what is called the decibel scale. And the decibel scale is a little strange in that it is logarithmic. And so what that means is that every sound level, the sound level in decibels increases by by 10. Each level is 10 times more energy than the level before. Okay? So if 60, which is like the volume of like a normal conversation, 60 decibels, if you jump up to 70 decibels, that 70 decibel sound is actually releasing 10 times as much energy as the 60 decibel conversation. If you have an 80 decibel sound, that is 10 times as much energy as a 70 decibel, and 100 times releasing 100 times as much energy as the 60 decibel sound. So it's kind of a strange scale. The Richter scale, the earthquake scale, actually works the same way. So, like a level 5 on the earthquake Richter scale is 10 times more energy than a 4. So it just works that way. Okay. 0 decibels is not no sound. That's actually the softest sound that we are physically capable of hearing. And 130 decibels is what's called the threshold of pain. And so that's when the sound is so loud that it starts to become painful. Okay. So if loud sounds is what causes our hearing loss, the question then becomes, how loud is too loud? Pretty much everything under 80 decibels doesn't really cause any hearing loss or any hearing damage at all. It's at about 85 decibels where things start to become more damaging to your ears. And even 85 decibels, you'd have to be exposed to that sound for 8 hours in a row, like continuously, before you would suffer permanent hearing loss. If it's less than 8 hours, your cells might be damaged or injured, but if you give yourself a sound detox, they'll recover and you'll be fine. There's no permanent loss there. Of course, as the sound gets louder, the less it takes less time for damage to occur. So anything above 120 decibels, like any exposure, would cause some permanent damage. And less than that, it can be a few minutes or an hour, depending on the sound. 110 decibels, which is actually not on my chart here, but it's between 1 and 2 minutes, um, is actually the loudest setting on your cell phone. If you have um, the volume all the way up and you have the earbuds in your ears, you would be exposed to 110 decibels. And as you can see, that if you're at that volume for 1 to 2 minutes, you have experienced permanent hearing loss. And that is primarily the current hypothesis for why young adults and teenagers are experiencing premature hearing loss, is because we have been putting in those earbuds a lot more often for many, many more hours than previous generations have done so. I mean, prior to cell phones, people had headphones that fit over the top of their ears, or even larger and bulkier. But the little tiny ones that you put right up against your ear canal are the ones that apparently are guilty of causing some of this premature hearing loss. And then what are some examples of things that make sounds at these volumes? Okay, so this is just sort of a cheat list, or that goes through some of these. So 80 decibels is like a vacuum cleaner or a screaming child. The 120 decibels is like your average rock concert. 130 decibels is like a jet taking off. And then 140 decibels is like a gunshot, and that's like a gunshot at the source. Like if you're some distance away, like you've heard a gun go off before, don't assume that you've necessarily experienced hearing loss. The sound intensity follows the inverse square law. So as you increase your distance, the intensity that you're exposed to drops off really, really quickly. At 150 decibels, your eardrums would shatter. Not a pleasant experience. Apparently, it's very painful. At 185 decibels, the sound would be so loud that it causes all the particles in your body to kind of like shift one way and shift the other way, like really rapidly. And this might cause an embolism to form in your lungs. And it would take a few hours for that to spread to your heart. So if it gets to your heart, that could kill you. And you usually don't know that that's happened. You don't necessarily feel pain from the embolism itself, although if you've been exposed to sound that loud, you probably feel terrible. And then we getting up to 194 decibels. That is the volume of an asteroid impact. So we're talking really loud here. Remember, this is not a linear scale, it's an exponential scale or logarithmic scale. And then at 202 decibels, you would instantly die. Like you wouldn't even have time to worry about it. Here are some really loud sounds. 204 decibels is the loudest sound we ever recorded. And that was the Saturn V rocket from about 100 meters away. We actually did have microphones that were closer because we wanted to see how loud it actually was. But those microphones did not survive the sound wave. So it was very loud. And then 240 decibels is our estimation of a nuclear explosion. And then 285 decibels is how loud we estimated Mount St. Helen blowing off her top in 1980 was. And then the loudest sound ever, we believe, was the Krakatoa volcanic eruption in 1883. This was a volcano that emitted so much ash and soot into the atmosphere, mostly sulfur dioxide, that it caused half of the globe to experience very dramatic global cooling. And there was no summer one year on what is now the eastern United States. But anyway, when it erupted, the sound was so loud that people's eardrums were shattered 40 miles away. And so this was 1883. We obviously didn't have any way of measuring how loud this sound was, but based on the idea that at 40 miles away it had to be 150 decibels, we can use our models and, that inverse square law to figure out how loud it probably was at its source. And this volcanic eruption was so loud that it was heard 3,000 miles away, which means people heard that volcano go off from 3,000 miles away. That's like something exploded in New York, and then we in California heard it. It would have taken 4 hours for that sound wave to reach us, but we would have heard it 4 hours after it happened. Anyway, that volcanic eruption was estimated to be 310 decibels, and so that's the loudest example we have had in our history. Typically, in terms of all of these sounds, most of these things are not things that you have to worry about being exposed to on your day to day. Like even fireworks, that's the 150 decibels. That's how loud that is at the source. That's not how loud it is when you're on the ground. But even so, you experience fireworks maybe once or twice a year at the most. So if you're worried about your hearing, first of all, or if you're worried about loud sounds, don't worry about dying because that is unlikely. You're unlikely to be exposed to that. But otherwise, there are ways that you can slow down the hearing loss that you naturally get as you get older. Okay. So the big one is to use earplugs when you know you're going to be in a loud environment. So just having like a little ball of wax or those little foam ones, like even those, like they don't. It doesn't sound like it's doing anything. I promise you, it's filtering out a lot in terms of what gets to your inner ear. Turn the volume down on your music. If you're going to be listening for more than a few minutes, 60% is really what you should be going for. And if you're in an environment that's too loud for you to be able to hear at that volume, like hear the music, then maybe you're in an environment that is too loud to listen to music to begin with. If you wear real headphones, and I'm being like earbuds are real, AirPods are real headphones as well, but like the big bulky ones, like the sound canceling ones, those like cancel out enough sound in your environment that the volume doesn't have to be as loud on your playlist or whatever. In order to get the same experience, because it gets rid of all the sound pollution from your environment. Wear ear protection when working with noisy equipment, or if you're, going to the gun range or whatever. Number 5 is actually a big one. Like, don't listen to music in confined spaces for long periods of time. The most confined space where people tend to listen to their music a lot is in your car. So if you have the windows all the way up and you're blasting that music, that sound hits the window and the wall and then bounces back. So not only are you being exposed to the initial wave, but you're also being exposed to the reflection of the wave. So you're doubling up how much that loud music is hitting you, or hitting your inner ear specifically. So a way that you can listen to loud music in that confined space is to open the windows and let the rest of the world enjoy your fantastic music as well. And then you can have a hearing. The last thing here is you can have go to the music concert, even though it's gonna cause some hearing loss. Like, live your life, do the things you love to do. But then after you've had that really loud experience, give yourself a hearing detox. And apparently, those hair cells need 16 hours to heal after you have reached your maximum safe time. So if you go to the concert and then you take a 16-hour break, that allows the injured cells to heal themselves. The ones that died won't come back, but anything that's not doing okay will heal in about 16 hours. And then my last piece of advice to you is don't completely freak out about this. I know some of my parts of this presentation are designed a little bit for shock value, but some hearing loss is expected and unavoidable. Like, again, don't stop living your life. And also, from the medical science side of things, we're developing a lot of technology to help with hearing loss and deafness and various other things. So the technology here is growing. So hopefully, by the time you're in your 50s and 60s and you can't hear anymore, um, we will have technology to replace your ears with something cool. And yeah, that's the intro to sound. Thank you for joining me today.